So now I have the great pleasure to introduce my guest, friend, colleague, former employee, current client, somebody who shakes things up wherever she goes, Aliyah Allie. Aliyah and I actually go way back. She started her career as a research associate at Jack Hammer. It's been amazing to watch her career evolve since then. She's now executive head at X-Bigly Labs, which is Dis-Chem's innovation hub. It's a new thing. She and her team are just completely rethinking how South Africans experience healthcare, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail shortly. But if you look at Aliyah's LinkedIn profile, which I'll encourage you to do, you'll notice that her career journey has not been linear. From Jack Hammer to McKinsey, stints at the Touch Foundation, Nova Pioneer, which is an education nonprofit, the UNDP, a research fellow at Columbia University, back to McKinsey, not entirely a straight line. And what I have always admired about Aliyah is just her incredibly big vision and her mission to tackle hefty, important societal problems, which she's been doing pretty much wherever she lands. So Aliyah, I'm so happy to have you here with me today. Welcome.
Thank you, Debbie. I really, really appreciate the invitation and all the effort that's gone into the preparation for this. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we had a bit of a plan for the session. We said we were going to cover three kind of main areas, talking about non-linear career paths, of which you and I are experts, leadership choices and principles for somebody who's kind of newly running a big team. And then we'll talk maybe about ambition and identity and gender. For everybody who's listening and dialed in, please drop your Q&A. There's a Q&A bit there. There's a thingy. A very scientific term for the place where you put your questions, which we will try to answer at the end. Okay, Aliyah. First, let's discuss your very, very cool role at X-Bigly Labs, because the brand is not really that well known yet. So share a bit more about what it is and how it fits into Dis-Chem.
Yeah, so maybe let me start with Dis-Chem and where Dis-Chem finds itself. So an incredible brand that's really, really loved by South Africans, and has a certain reputation in the zeitgeist. It's the place most consumers go to grab one thing and leave, typically very stubbornly refusing to get a basket and leaving with kind of an armful of things that they weren't expecting to spend any money on. So a really, really well-loved brand, started very much and still operates very much as a pharmacy retailer. And we're in a really interesting moment of embarking on and already having done some very important things to disrupt healthcare delivery in South Africa. The gatekeepers, the people who have held the keys, have spent a lot of time and energy protecting good quality healthcare in some ways for a very few South Africans. And there are a very significant number of South Africans who are either uninsured and underinsured and don't get access to the level of quality that they need it. And we're really poised for disruption. When you start to look at the data of where people are spending healthcare money on, we're very well poised for disruption. Lots of little health techs and many people in different pockets have tried very hard to get this right, particularly in the government. But the government's too big to be able to do it. And health techs are typically too small. And we're exactly the right size. It feels a little bit of a Goldilocks tale, if you want, and we recognize we're exactly the right. We have the right level of scale, but we're not as big as the state is, and we don't come with the kind of baggage that the state has. So we're very well poised to be able to start to think about healthcare in a very different way, and we're doing that. So Dis-Chem's on this journey, going very much from kind of retail pharmacy to integrated health player. The challenge is that the business that has historically always been an innovative business. If you speak to the founders, they'll tell you the stories of being the very first pharmacy that used technology for pricing. And Lynette, who's one of the founders, talks about getting a floppy disk and fetching a floppy disk with the pricing file, coming and putting in an old machine. So it sounds archaic now, but in the 70s, in the early 80s, was a sign of real innovation. The business was one of the first businesses to bring on board SAP as a core part of the tech stack. So really, innovation is in our blood, but There have been some strategic areas that haven't quite gotten the energy of innovation in the same way. Things like data and analytics, things like digital, things like really, really reformulating the organization to operate as a modern organization. So kind of the hardcore process engineering work, and then things that sit on the MarTech stack. So the way we think about marketing, that evolution to think about broadsheets in a different way, all the way into kind of how we use loyalty and CRM. Those core strategic enablers are going to be critical for that move into the integrated healthcare space. And my team was effectively created to take those strategic enablers and very quickly nurse them to maturity in a very 21st century, 2025 sort of way. So that's really what my job is. And we created a brand around it to be able to attract talent in a different way, to be able to operate in a fit for purpose sort of way, more as a tech company than as a team in a retailer or even a team in a healthcare player. So when you walk around our space, what you feel, one of our colleagues, his parents popped in yesterday, which is delightful. I had two Jewish parents hanging out and eating chocolate in my office yesterday. It was the most fun I've had all day. And they said, it feels like walking through Google. And I was like, that's what we were going for. So the space feels very different. The way the team operates and moves is very different, far more fit for purpose for a tech business than a retailer or a healthcare player.
I mean, so many other big corporates have established these separately branded innovation hubs for those exact reasons. And I can see that you guys are also doing amazing things with driving the brand recognition. So everybody's on this call, if you don't yet know about XBD Labs, I really encourage you to just go online and see some of the very, very cool brand and marketing that's out there to drive the brand awareness. But just to go back to this role that you got, all right, let's just bring it back to brass tacks, which is you're not a tech or digital expert, okay? Nor are you specifically a healthcare retail pharmacy person. And to my knowledge, I mean, you may have done this on the side somewhere, but you haven't run an innovation or tech hub before. So how did you land this? How did you land this amazing job? Come on.
I am hardcore and very competent, Debbie.
Listen, I know that. That's why I hired you in the first place.
So I am somewhat of an unusual pick. And the truth is I actually wasn't really hired for this job. Roy was my client in my consulting life. Roy's our CEO. And I don't know what it was, but in the very first year-go, when I met him for the first time and he met me for the first time, I was the engagement manager on the team. I was like making sure the presentation worked, and then started to present some of the analysis that the team found. I think we both seemed to understand that I had a deep passion for what it is Dis-Chem was trying to do, and I was bleeding myself into it. I really, really cared about what the team was doing. And then, I spent 12 weeks helping build that strategy. I went away for 3-4 months and did some other work, and then came back to help the implementation of that piece of work that we did the strategy for. And the more time I spent doing it, the more I fell in love with what it is we were trying to do. And I think the more Roy and some of the other ExCo members seem to recognize that. And when I started the conversation with Roy about potentially joining Dis-Chem, we didn't really know what the role was. Like, I'd initially started talking about coming to lead loyalty, which is where, I was doing some of the support in the consulting space. That role now reports to someone who reports to me, So Roy was like, listen, I think you should come and do data and analytics. Like, that feels like a thing that we need a competent pair of hands to come in and take and run. And I said to him at that stage, I was like, I mean, I work with data in my job all the time, but I know nothing about data engineering. I'm not even a data scientist. I can do some pivot tables in Excel. And he said, That's fine. You will hire the right people. I believe you'll hire the right people, and I believe you will figure out the parts of it that you don't know right now very quickly. And that is a little bit my superpower, is the ability to
Mm.
take something. It's like the Marie Kondo in me. Like I take the messy thing, it irritates me so much that my brain automatically pushes to create structure. And I'm that quintessential generalist who knows very quickly what I don't know and knows where to go deep, but also knows how to span a massive surface area. So if you think about some of the things that sit within my custodianship, they're very technical, very intense pieces and very different from each other, right? Like this process engineering thing's very different from CRM, very different from loyalty, very different from digital, very different from analytics. And the ability to know how much I need to know and where I use my energy to go very deep is a thing I'm good at. And that's the thing Roy recognized. And in his, I think, conviction that the data and analytics piece was going to be fine, it was the right moment. I think he'd had the idea of creating the innovation hub for a while, but
Mm.
didn't quite know what the right moment was to activate it. And as we started talking about what I wanted to do in the analytics space, he went, hold on, this might be the right moment. Yeah, take all these other things and let's create a brand around it. And I was like, well,
Wow.
okay,
Okay.
let's
Well,
go.
I have known you to arrive in a CEO's office and say, I want to do something other than the job I was actually hired for. So. All right. So this is a great segue to talking about non-linear careers, which I think a lot of people have questions about. How do I make sense of something that doesn't necessarily look entirely coherent? So what I mean about when we talk about this idea of nonlinear careers is like a career sequencing that doesn't really follow necessarily a logic or isn't particularly coherent, either because you've made a bunch of industry changes or different types of roles, or career breaks. Sometimes that is at play. And I mean, I'm a case study myself because, as many people know, after high school, I pursued a career as a contemporary dancer, choreographer, and director while I was completing my law degree, which I did, and then decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. And I was also at the end of my dance career. So it was my sort of late 20s. And so I got a job as a data capture at a recruitment company, because I mean, what else does one do? And then 2 years later, executive search firm, and then the rest is history. But I mean, if you look at that, it makes no sense whatsoever. But there's a through line to it. And so I'm curious to know, with your non-linear career, which has been somewhat of a meandering path, what is the through line? Where's the thread? Where do you connect the dots?
Before I answer your question, I didn't know that you started at the recruitment agency as a data capturer.
Well, data capture is a very fancy word for I arrived at my first office. First time I'd worn like office clothes that weren't dance togs. And before computers. So the data capturing was a pile of CVs that was on the desk that I had to phone people with an actual phone, and find out their new details and then write them on the CV with a new, because that was data capturing. Yeah.
I don't think you remember this, but that's how I started at Jack Hammer. I came to do database. I was part-time, like 10 hours a week. That's how I started at Jack Hammer.
Right,
Was 10 hours a
exactly.
week. And then someone took maternity leave. Not so much the CVs, because your database was a lot more
Yeah.
sophisticated when I was at university. But that's exactly what my entry point was. I didn't know that.
All right. Well, let's
So,
say to all the people out there, if you get a data capturing job, maybe it leads to maybe it leads to greatness. You never know. All right. So what's
so
the line for
yeah,
you?
it's
Come
you know,
on.
I struggle with this question, and I knew you were going to ask this question because we've spoken about it. And the thing that I find difficult about this question is because I can say things and I can talk about a through line now with retrospect. And I can build this like wonderful narrative around it all and pretend that I knew all along that this is where it's going to end up and that it was all going to work out. And it's just not true, right? Like you make decisions with the set of things that are in front of you, and you make the best decision you possibly can. And honestly, like there's a part of me that feels like there is an architect. I believe in God. I follow religion. I really feel like I don't know if God cares enough about my like little career amongst the like 7 billion people, but I certainly feel like it's worked out for me. And I'm still very early in my career, right? I'm 36. I have at least 30 years ahead of me in terms of work. It could go very wrong. So don't take this as advice. Like maybe just think of it as an anecdote that maybe is a little bit interesting. But for me, they and not so much the through line retrospectively. Like I can talk about the things that I solved for that were in front of me as I went along. The things I solved for. So very early on, I'm a kid from a lower middle class family. I have a single mom who had 5 kids, and I was the eldest. There was very much a need for like upward mobility, and I was the golden goose in many ways, right? I had to earn an income, and that income had to be rich enough to sustain my mother in retirement. So that like first decision-making point was very much around like how I didn't have the freedom to do things that I necessarily found interesting. I had to find the thing that was going to make me a reasonable amount of money because I was smart. I was the family's golden goose. So that's one thing, right? Like many of my career decisions were shaped around where am I going to earn the most money? And where is my net present value going to be the highest? How do I set myself on a trajectory for upward mobility for myself and my mom and my siblings? So that was kind of the one. The second was I always made decisions around where I was going to learn the most. And management consulting is notorious for being a place that drives you very hard. But in my 20s, it was a space that I was incredibly enthusiastic about because I believed what people said and ultimately came to find that to be very true in my experiential experience of it, that 1 year in management consulting is often the equivalent of 3 or 4 years out in the world, right? And people think of me as like a 36-year-old now, but I've probably gotten to 10,000 hours on whatever the 10,000 hour thing is, if you believe that. Some people don't believe it, but I've certainly spent a lot of time perfecting my problem solving muscle, where most people working a typical 9 to 5 get that spread over a longer period of time, right? So management consulting, because you're working so intensely in a very, very specific way, you work very long hours, you build that quite quickly in that environment. So that's the kind of second thing. The third thing is I've always followed the people. So, as you talk about my Jack Hammer time, Jack Hammer started very much as a place that I went to because I needed a part-time job when I was at university, and I happened to be, find this database manager 10 hours. Someone happened to go on maternity leave, and Debbie went, she looks like she could be a researcher. Let's make her a researcher. She data captures well enough. And she gets bored very quickly. Let's make her a researcher so she can stop bothering me. I think that's maybe what happened. But when I tell the story now, and I ultimately stayed 2.5 years. Like I deferred my McKinsey office. I knew before I joined Jack Hammer that I was ultimately going to go to McKinsey, but I deferred my McKinsey offer by a year and ended up spending almost 3 years at Jack Hammer because I was very drawn to you. And when I tell the story, I'm like, it was this incredible woman who was a dancer, choreographer turned badass entrepreneur. And I learned so much about building teams, leading teams in unconventional ways, and building businesses from working with you in a very, very formative time in my career. And I've continued to make decisions that way up to this job, right? Like I joined Dis-Chem, not to join Dis-Chem necessarily, not to lead data and analytics, not even to lead this team. I was very convinced that Roy was doing something exceptionally cool, exceptionally impactful, and I was very convinced that he was going to win. And I wanted to be in as close proximity to that as possible. And he could have hired me as like the head of facilities of the Midrand office, and I would probably have taken the job because and there were 4 or 5 other people in South Africa who probably held the same place in my imagination, where I was like, that is the person I want to go and work with. And I wouldn't have left McKinsey until I found that proximity to the right people. And then maybe the kind of fourth thing for me has been about experimentation. And this is probably less about my career and more about my life. But it's played out very specifically in the way I've approached my career. I hold almost everything as a strong hypothesis loosely held. So I'll always have a strong opinion and a strong point of view on something, just about everything. But I don't hold it with such fierceness, right? I hold the opinion typically very, very strongly in that I have a point of view and I have evidence to back it up, but I hold it with loose fingers. And there were all sorts of things that I had as ideas in my mind in my 20s around what is it, what does a great career look like for me? For a long time, it was I need to be in the social impact space and that I can only do that in the social sector. For a long time, it was that I want to work in conflict. For a long time, it was that I can't work in unstructured environments. I'm not a startup person. I held these opinions of myself. I was very lucky in that I was allowed to take a sabbatical from McKinsey. And that sabbatical for most analysts is 2 to 3 years. I managed to negotiate my way into 6 years. And the series of things, as I typically do. And the things that I did in between were really opportunities for me to stress test the things I believed. So I believed I can't do frontline NGO work. And that's why I went to very rural Tanzania to work in healthcare. Turns out that is true. I can't work in frontline NGO work. It's a big struggle for me. I really believed that I wanted to end up in conflict, and I thought the UN was an incredible place. So I went and I spent time in Amman and I worked at the UNDP, and I hated it, and it was untrue. I cannot spend any chunk of my career doing that. So this like experimenting, and I was very lucky to be given that space to be able to experiment and be quite risky in how I made decisions. And even now I'm very experimental in how I do things. So those are some of the through lines and the things that are probably the smaller inputs that have led me, as opposed to the like through line that I look back and I'm like, oh, this was the grand plan.
Yeah. I mean, listen, those are amazing through lines, nevertheless, to join the dots on that. And I think sometimes people feel a bit, particularly women, around why should I be focused on upward mobility and money? Isn't that something that I should be rather choosing something that would have a broader impact on society or my family? And the harsh reality is that sometimes we are the breadwinner. And we do have to make decisions that are based on hardcore numbers. But it doesn't necessarily need to be mutually exclusive to also doing something that solves certain types of problems or feels very impactful to you. It doesn't even necessarily need to be strategic or have this big picture mission. I know that's always been very important to you. The luxury, I guess, or sometimes the good luck of landing or finding the right people and the right leaders. I think that sometimes is a bit of luck. I see many people do a lot of due diligence before they make a career move that on who they're going to be working with. And sometimes that is not how it pans out, and they can't be faulted for that. So I think there is an element of luck there, but sometimes once you get accustomed to what good looks like, you will notice that. But then lastly, that idea of the stories we tell ourselves about what we believe we are great at, what we believe we won't do, what we believe are the stories that either open up opportunity or exclude us. We exclude ourselves from potential opportunity. I think that when you talk about experimentation, if I have to distill it into what are we telling ourselves about what we're good at, what we'll never be able to do. I think we're sometimes put our own unnecessary limiting beliefs on ourselves. I certainly know for myself that I think that I would probably be okay doing anything where I could put passion into it. It's the fact that I landed up in recruitment was so chance. And so I would, if I've got one piece of advice, it is take a look at the stories you might be telling yourself about where your superpowers are, about what you're good at or not good at, and really re-examine that if you're thinking about, well, something's not feeling great or not fulfilled in my life right now. But I want to move on, because you and I can go on for a long time on this non-linear segue. But sorry, one last point on that. It's totally okay to have a career that does not make sense. You will find people who will recognize the value in the work that you've done. Make sense of it yourself. Let's talk leadership. And then in particular, as you're building your team sort of how are you figuring out the kind of leader you want to be? I mean, I know for myself, when I started out, I was an absolutely useless manager, quite frankly. I didn't know the first thing about engaging thoughtfully with the people whose salaries I was paying. But I did know one thing for sure. I did not want to manage my team the way that I had been managed in the first company that I worked for. And so I started out with a set of my principle was I'll never do that. It was the I'll never do that principle. And then slowly, I acquired a clearer set of leadership values and guidelines that ultimately became the bedrock of what you know as Jack Hammer and has sustained. So here's my question is, how are you going about this process of determining how you want to lead?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of reactions to that question. I don't think of the kind of leader I want to be as disconnected from the kind of person I want to be. Um, did you lose me? Did you hear what I said, Debbie? Because you froze
Only
on
for
my
half a
screen.
second.
You got me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the kind of leader is not disconnected from the kind of person I want to be. And when I think about the kinds of things I'm looking to mold myself in as a human, they're very much the kinds of things that translate into the kind of leader I want to be, right? So I was saying this to someone earlier today, very, very early in my leadership journey. I was at UCT, I was leading UCT RAG, which is a student-run organization that, it was the biggest leadership role I'd had up to that point. I had like 14, 15 direct reports, 100-man strong organization. Our budget was probably like 3-4 million rand, which now seems so small, but back then was massive.
Huge.
And I remember we did Strength Finder with my team, and I remember the facilitator said, you are someone who is very good at getting people from point A to point B. You just don't really care about whether or not they get there alive. And my entire executive team was basically sitting around and they all nodded. That sounds about right. And it was funny, kind of, but I mean, this was 2006, no, 2007, 2008. And I still remember those words as if he said it to me this afternoon. And I remember really kind of struggling with the intensity of the organization and all the ways it was very, very straining. Like I remember feeling very out of my depth and very insecure, and the version of me that emerged in all of that was a version of me I really didn't like, and I didn't enjoy it. Like I just felt miserable all the time, and I wanted to be a person who had far more emotional regulation, and I still do want to be the kind of person who has far more emotional regulation. And when I start to confront a thing that is challenging for me, either as a person or in like a technical skill set, that I can approach that with the same kind of curiosity that I do anything else. That really the limits in my skill set and the limits in my ability to do something is really just something to be curious about and investigate and explore and then solve in the same way I solve other problems. And that became very much like a clarion call, if you want, was how do I start to play with who I am as a person and play with who I am as a leader in a putty sort of way, not because I ever want to be anyone other than who I am, but because there are certain things about myself that I may have thought all my life is true, but may not necessarily be. So that same kind of experimentation orientation around my career is very much also then around how I thought about myself. Maybe I can be someone who's very deeply people oriented. Now the exercise for me is then to understand what happens when I'm under a lot of stress, and what happens when I over-index in something and obsess over it and then swing all the way to the other side, right? Like you don't want to overcorrect. So these things are the moment where I am in my career at the moment is one around holding polarities. How do you hold these things that seem like they're mutually exclusive and they can't exist in the same time? And how do you hold them with lightness and playfulness, as opposed to an intensity that breaks you and breaks the thing. And the thing that I hold custodianship of is massive. We've committed a very significant rand value for this unit to deliver over the next 5 years, and it's true of everyone that sits in this unit and everyone who intersects with it in the broader Dis-Chem world, but it's especially true for me, I think, to come to an understanding of how to hold those things with some level of polarity. I think the thing I'm perhaps struggling with, and that's really important for me, is that I hold a very high bar for myself around performance. And I take that very seriously in all areas of my life, right? So it's strange to call being a mom a thing of performance, but there's a certain bar, for example, that I've set for myself around what is acceptable for me as a mom and how do I show up to that. And the same is true of delivering what this team needs to deliver, and how do I hold with the same kind of playfulness the thing that needs to be delivered without breaking anything. So yeah, a lot, and I spend a lot of time with, a coach and a therapist to play some of these things
Right.
out. And I have lots of support to make that all happen, because none of these things are disconnected. How I show up in the boardroom, how I show up in managing my team, is fundamentally a reflection of the kind of person I'm trying to mold myself into being.
Yeah, and I think the molding is actually very true. People there's a view that some people have leadership skills, leadership qualities. And my view is no, these are skills and aptitudes and strategies that one can learn and then deploy. And you can increase your range because you go from your default, the way you're typically wired, which is I'm going to drive the performance of this come hell or high water, whether people get there alive at the end, maybe, maybe not. You can go from that to really leading in a very different way that takes into account people's lives and has a level of increased empathy. I mean, when I started out, so you did the Strength Finder, I did back in the day the Discovery Insights wheel, and I was, if anybody knows that type of assessment, I was so red, as in action oriented, focused on action and performance, so red that I was off the charts red. And when I did the same assessment a number of years later, my sort of color wheel in terms of people orientation and level of empathy had really increased. I still have my default wiring for sure. I still have the default, which is driven to performance, but it's not at the exclusion of a level of real empathy for people. And I think that evolved over time, but it evolved through a number of, I was just a student of leadership. The books that I read, the people that I followed, the ideas that I tried. Fortunately, I was in a space, my own, where I had a place to experiment and play around how did I want to have an environment that was different from most. And
Yeah.
so, what I see you being able to do in this slightly sort of separate entity is this opportunity to also try out new ways of leading that are not just your default with a whole bunch of support and help. I mean, I think it's harder sometimes for people who go into an established environment where where they don't have as much self-determination and autonomy to deploy a leadership strategy that feels more true to them and is possibly counter the environment that they're in. And do see that all the time. And I have such great empathy for people who are required to go in one direction, even though their belief system and their values is in another. I just had a conversation with somebody who's needing to fire an SVP, because their retention rate in their product wasn't good. And it wasn't about the product. I mean, it wasn't about the person, it was about the product itself. But nevertheless, needing to fire the guy because somebody needed to be the full person. And to have to do such a thing creates such dissonance. So, that's a slightly sidebar into what a privilege it is to be in an environment where you can find that alliance between your personal values and the company that you're working with. Alia, can
Yeah.
we do the segue into the being a woman in a man's world thing? I mean, No,
We can. I want to say a couple of things about your reflection quickly before we
okay.
do the
Okay.
man's world thing. I you know, the thing that I have to remind people of around me is we have an incredibly hard thing that we're trying to do, right? We're not just trying to do what or be an enabler into the Dis-Chem world. Like we're trying to fix healthcare. It is a
Yeah.
fundamentally broken thing in the country. Like I've been saying it's like the equivalent of trying to put a man in the moon in the 70s, right? Like it is a hard thing that we're trying to do. And then we have taken all the parts of Dis-Chem that are most broken. We have put them in this team, and then we've put like 6 of those things in this one team and said, please fix them. Right? Now, to be able to do that, I mean, Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn, I was listening to a podcast of his the other day, and he was saying, oh, this business of like working a 9 to 5 is totally like go and work a 9 to 5 if you want to work a 9 to 5, but know that you're never going to change the world if you're trying to work a 9 to 5. Um, and there's a thing about that is interesting for me, right? Which is what does it mean? Like, what does high performance mean? What is the ability to take a hard thing and really fundamentally reorient it? And what are the inputs into it? Now, traditionally, the inputs into it, if you're following anything from the investment banks or the management consulting firms, the inputs into that is sure some things around like structure and frameworks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also like take a bunch of very smart and capable people and sweat them in every way
Hmm.
you possibly can. Now, science tells us that that's not what drives performance. That's not what drives creativity. That's not what drives innovation. What drives all of those things is the ability for people to fail. It's good quality sleep. It's good quality nutrition. It's movement. It's fresh air and light, etc. And this is a little bit the experimentation we're doing. Along with taking these hard things and trying to fix them, we're also trying to do the experimentation of what does it mean to drive high performance and how do you
Right.
build the inputs and remove the friction for people to actually get there. And then all the things that you understand from the work of people like Daniel Pink around building mastery and giving people autonomy, etc. Like how do you
Mhm.
effectively operationalize those things so they're fundamentally core to how you operate? And it's really hard. It's really hard to take all of those inputs, put them in, and then have what comes out of it, like effectively the ability to have gotten shit done, because ultimately that's what matters. It's not just having had a good time doing all of these things. It's that like you have to deliver something and you have to do it in a reasonably fast time. So this is one of the polarities that, I'm holding and struggling with at the moment, actually.
So I want to just position something that I have a fundamental belief that high performance and excellence is not mutually exclusive from a sense of well-being, an element of I am enjoying my work life, I am feeling engaged, I'm feeling well. I believe those things actually go hand in hand. And
Absolutely.
um, and so trying to really influence a broader narrative around the possibility of that, not only the possibility, but I believe fundamentally in the probability of that, is contrary to the legacy that we come out of in terms of make those people work. And high performance is all about sacrifice at all costs. I did come from that viewpoint, and I have gravitated to something that is very different. But the world, the work world that I see around me is still very entrenched in that belief. So the more people and leaders we can influence to believe that high performance and delivery and getting shit done, you do that with people who are well. That's my biggest ambition actually in the work that I do. Okay, now can we talk about being a woman in a man's world? But let me frame
Sure.
the question. Okay, so I know we kind of we do, you and I have a similar view of not really wanting to rely on this idea or use the idea of, well, there's so many challenges, so it's kind of like becomes a bit of an excuse for not achieving goals and ambitions. Because of, well, we're at such a disadvantage because of our gender. And I've always believed if we work hard enough, smart enough, we can get ahead. But I also did decide to call my company Jack Hammer, a male sounding name, because at the time and still now, most of the executive search firms, all of the professional services firms, they were all named after their male founders. And so I kind of wanted to, it was a bit of a maverick nod to that, but I also was like, okay, I get a chance to do something with this branding. And then I still do get a kick out of the fact that I'll walk into a room or a Zoom room and people will inquire, where's Jack? And, or alternatively, they'll just get totally confused and then call me Jackie for the rest of the meeting. Okay, but tell me your thoughts on this particular point, being the female in the room and how you're
Do
navigating
people
around that.
do people still call the landline asking for screws and hammers
Sometimes,
and
sometimes.
it
Dom who
happens.
handles the yeah, so they do. Jackhammer was a hardware store as well, so we did get those lines confused too.
I remember
Yeah.
taking many of those calls when the receptionist was away from her desk. Um, yeah, so this is such a difficult one for me because on the one hand, there is absolutely, without a question in my mind, the reality that life and professional life in some ways is harder for women, right? The gender gap in terms of multiple different things, like your ability to make it into leadership and management, your ability to move up a path, like those are true. And the same is true if you take a racial lens, right? That like if you are a Black person in most countries, it is going to be harder for you than it is for a white person. Those are
Yeah.
like absolute realities. And for a long time, you know, not for a long time, but for most of my professional life, I was young, I was brown. I also wore hijab for a long time. So I would walk into rooms wearing hijab. And for a good chunk of my time as an analyst, globally in the firm, I was the only hijabi on the consulting side. There were lots of receptionists and EAs who wore hijab in some of the, you know, in some markets. The Middle East hadn't quite moved in the way the Middle East has moved, but for a long time, I was like the only person on the consulting side who wore hijab. And yeah, like, and it would be foolish to say that they aren't challenging. They absolutely are, and they are structural, and they are challenging. And even in countries where we have experimented with affirmative action type things, those structural impediments are still absolutely very much there.
Yeah.
And I would be absolutely foolish to say that I was not in some way or form a victim of those things. What I do though is I take those structural things and I try to play them to my advantage. The thing is to understand the rules of the game a little bit, right? So I didn't do an MBA, even though that's what my funding was for. I managed to convince them to pay for a master's in negotiation and conflict resolution. And when you do these like negotiation pieces, there's always a module on gender and negotiation. And one of the core things in gender and negotiation is if you're a woman and you're negotiating for yourself or you're negotiating for a benefit that you will receive, you will almost always receive some kind of backlash. Even if you're with someone who's very progressive, even if you're with another woman, by the way, like often women play into these structural impediments in ways that men are a little bit looser about. We're often the reinforcing mechanism for some of these impediments. So if you're negotiating for yourself, you almost always experience some kind of backlash. What do we know and understand to be true about women? What do we want to be true about women? We want women to be communal. We want women to be maternal. The structure, it's not right. I don't agree with it, but the structure requires women to be maternal and community oriented, and we care more for others than we care for ourselves. So what the training says, what negotiation theory says, is if you are negotiating, always position the negotiation in a communal sort of way, even if what you're negotiating for is yourself. So in a salary negotiation, for example, you don't go in and say, hey, this is my number and this is what I deserve and this is what I'm supposed to get. You position that very much as you having a higher salary is of benefit to the community. So it depends very much on who you're negotiating with, but things along the lines of, you know, I'm community oriented, or I'm responsible for a very big family. I can't remember exactly what some of the kind of tactical points are, but you start to frame your negotiation very much as things related to community. Now, I mean, you should definitely not lie. It definitely plays into a structure. And some women and my hardcore feminist friends are just like, please don't do that, because all you're doing is reinforcing a structure. Then I'm like, yeah, like you have to figure out what you're trying to do. Are you trying to upset the apple cart? Right? And be that like little drip, drip, drip into upsetting the apple cart? Or are you trying in this moment to win a negotiation? And figuring out where you sit in that is difficult. It's difficult. And figuring out which moment you're choosing which battle is difficult. And I'm not saying this is easy, but having that sense of awareness, having a sense of what the structure is you're in today, as a person of color, as a woman, and then using that structure, like you go with the grain, right? Go with the grain, and you're more likely to be successful than not.
That's such a good point. And sometimes one questions oneself, is going with the grain, does that mean I'm selling out? But
Yeah.
you can be right or you can be effective. And I mean, I recall, oh goodness, way back, doing a fantastic negotiation with my male counterpart. I won that negotiation in terms of all of my points. I backed him into a corner. And then, man, the tables turned and I did not win at all because I had negotiated poorly in terms of understanding how to be effective. And so what I'm hearing you say is understand the game that you're playing. Be smart about that. And it doesn't mean that you're a sellout or a cop-out, but you can go with that grain. You can figure out how to be more effective as opposed to standing on a soapbox and just being right. And then you win the one line of points, but you don't actually get what you need. So let's talk about the balance. Unfortunately, we are sort of semi running out of time. So I just want to encourage anybody who's got a question to ask, if you just can pop that into the Q&A. I'm still going to try and get to perhaps one or two. But ambition, drive, your absolute mission of tackling this massive problem. Certainly, I'll wager my bets if anybody's going to be able to make a dent in this, it's going to be you and your team. But at the same time, you're also a mom of a preschooler. She's 5. And I mean, I know that my sort of big surge in terms of my career, I was very grateful. I had my kids much later. I had them in my late 30s. And the 18-hour days that I had been used to putting in and day out, I just was not able to do that once the kids came. And then there was also just the constant guilt of I was either not spending enough time with my kids or not spending enough time with the business. And so it was just a mess. So how are you navigating all of that?
With a lot of grace for myself and a lot of guilt. Both are true at the same time. It's not been easy. It's also this version of me is going to exist regardless of what my life looks like. So whether I was single in my 20s, whether I was married for the brief period of time I was married, whether I'm a single mom now post my divorce. So as a single mom, or when my daughter is like, as your daughter is today, starting college for the first time, you know, on her first day of university, I'm still going to be this person. I'm going to care a lot about doing cool shit and doing it with all the intensity that I do it with. Now, there are a couple of things I've had to think about and be very deliberate about. One of them is, what kind of childhood do I want this child to have? What kind of adult do I want her to be? And then as a result, what does her experience of this need to be, both in the things I need to deliberately do, and then again, like, how do I use the structure of my life in her favor? So I'll give you an example of each of those things. It is important to me that she feels loved, that she feels secure, that she feels like everything in her life makes a lot of sense, and she knows where she needs to be at any given point in time, and she has access to the kinds of opportunities that I certainly didn't have, but that she has for herself recognized that she wants. So I have a lot of help. I have an au pair, who works primarily in the afternoons. I have a nanny, and then I have an assistant who is here in the office with me. And because I'm a single parent, my mom passed away in September. Before that, my mom was very helpful in making things work. But because in the kind of family context of things, I'm light on the support that I need. I've had to bolster it by effectively paying for it. And then I'm very, very deliberate about a certain set of rituals. And with her, I'm super committed to them. So I have a block on my calendar between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. I don't take calls between that. If I have to speak to someone, it'll have to be after 8 p.m. And it's a sacrifice I have to make. And that sometimes someone needs to talk to me a little bit late. But her and I are together and we do everything we absolutely can we have dinner together, we do bath time together, we read. She's only 5, but I realized a few months ago that she can do long form. So her and I started reading Harry Potter. We're about to finish Philosopher's Stone. In a few days, we'll start Chamber of Secrets. So we read together every night. And so they're those types of rituals that are super important to me. We do something at night. We after we read, we put our feet up against the headboard. We lay with our backs down on the bed because it calms your nervous system, I am told. And we do highlight, low light, and fail forward. So we talk about what our highlight was for the day, our low light for the day, and then something we either did for the first time or something we failed at in the day. And some of that is because I have perfectionist tendencies and I struggle with anxiety. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree in this case. So baking in that appetite for failure is really important in her because I struggled with that. And I can see that she's going to start to too. So that's one thing. And then the kind of deliberate set of things. And then the things for me that are this is the grain of my life. This is how my life will be. This is who I am. I'm always going to work in an intense way. So I've baked in structurally for her the ability to benefit from that. So there's a corner in my office over here that you can't see that has specifically been set up for her. There's a playroom around the corner that has like Rubik's Cubes and coloring books and all sorts of things for the other moms like me who need to bring their children here on occasion so that the children arrive here and they feel part of it. Iman feels like this is her office. And then she walks around and there's such richness for a child to be surrounded by smart, capable, high-performing, hardcore, incredible people. Like, what a gift, actually. So there's a version of me that can feel tremendous guilt about it. And then there's also a version of me that can go, holy shit, I'm sitting on a gold mine as a mother of some of the coolest humans in this country. How do I structurally make my child feel like this is a great space for her and that it is hers? And how do I lend her some of the richness that I get to experience from the people around here? So she's like on a first name basis with everyone. Everyone knows that she walks around. She rules the roost over here.
So I was going to ask you something to inspire, leaving on an inspirational note, and I'm just going to take that because I think there are many more of us than we believe is possible to actually create these rituals at home, possibly even spaces in our work worlds, those of us who are back in office. I sort of had my kids in and out the office, and the one ritual that we did, that one thing that they remember from when they were little was I had one day of the week when I would go and fetch them from school. It was a Wednesday. I would go fetch them from school. I'd take them to the office and have lunch with them there because that was all the time I could spare. But if I asked them, like, what memories do they have? That's the one thing, because that was the thing that they valued so much, the one day that I would collect them from school, which makes me also kind of feel a bit bad. But then they had the exposure to what work looked like. So I would love to encourage people on this call to think about how they, if they've got kids, how they lobby for more involvement in their workplaces, not just for childcare, but for the role modeling that I see you doing, and which I kind of hope I've done. Mine are sort of fully baked almost. I've got one in high school and one just out of college. So we've got one question. I promised I'd do one question. So let's, we've got many questions. I'm just going to choose one. Oh, goodness. Okay. All right. Here's the one, which is in your 20s, should the priority be mastering your craft? And I interpret that to be like just doing your job, or building your leadership skills and personal brand. So what is the best approach in your view?
It's such a difficult thing to answer because it depends on what you're solving for. It depends on what you're solving for. Yeah, it's such a, like, whoever asked that question, can you send me a LinkedIn message and I will find 30 minutes to have a conversation with you, because it's an interesting question, right? Like I have friends who got married at 21 and they had their kids at 21, 23, 25.
Mm-hmm.
And then they spent their 20s doing the juggle. And then when they were ready to do that pivot because their children were a little bit bigger, they could spend their 30s and 40s really just like going for it, right? Because their kids were a little bit bigger, and parenting demands different things at different points in time, but the kind of labor intensity starts to dissipate a little bit the older they get. So and that's what they were solving for. That's what was important. It was important for them to have families. They solved for that very early on. And everything comes with a trade-off, right? And there is no right answer to any of this. There's a little bit like, what is your context? What are you solving for? And then how do you optimize given the choices that you're making and the trade-offs that you have to accept? So it's an imperfect answer. I wish I could say go this way and off you go, but it's yeah, unfortunately, it's not
Well,
quite that black and white.
I mean, I chose that question for that reason, actually, because it is always contextual. There is absolutely no right answer. I think based on this whole conversation that we've been having is around trusting yourself, trusting your gut, doing things with passion and purpose that feel rewarding. Yes, there's some level of thinking about how to deploy your time and the resources in the best way possible that will be financially rewarding, that will set you up for career success in the future, but don't overthink it. Sometimes just let things happen and let things unfold. Navigate carefully, learn the rules of the game if you can, keep your eyes wide open, and then advocate for yourself and the people around you to make the circle bigger, for greater leadership for women who can juggle being a career mom and to have a career and be a mom. Those things are totally imperfect, absolutely messy. None of us get out entirely unscathed, but we'll all be all right in the end. And with that, we're 2 minutes over time. I run a tight ship here, Aliyah, so I'm going to have to say goodbye. Thank you so much. This has been the best hour. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you share this session. I really appreciate your time, and connect with both of us on LinkedIn. And have an amazing day, evening, wherever you may be. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.